And joining me now in the studio is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, as well as our very own I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Dan, so Lebanon has a new president, and before we dive into what that means for the country, I want to ask you what it means for its neighbor, for Israel.
Well, Israel hopes that Lebanon will be stable and prosperous and led by people who oppose the idea that an Iran-backed militia like Hezbollah can control the border with Israel. Aoun, I believe, stands for all these things as well. He has stated clearly that he wants to enforce the monopoly of force in Lebanon and not have militias running around causing havoc. And he is a person who in the past, as head of the army, fought extreme jihadist forces in the north coming from Syria, which may put him in an interesting situation vis-a-vis Syria's new leadership. And in general, stability in Lebanon, I think, is in Israel's interest. Israel seeks good relations with Lebanon and has had implicitly, and sometimes with implausible deniability, good relations with Lebanon's Christians. Notwithstanding the fact that Lebanon needs all kinds of reforms to become a properly functioning country, this is a step in the right direction, and that is good for Israel as well.
We know that between the first and second round, the first round of the election today, he did not get the majority. He got 71 votes out of the 86 he needed. And then in the second round, he got 99. So what happened? In the interim, he met with Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, the head of Amal party, the other Shiite. There's the Shiite duo in Lebanon, Hezbollah and Amal. He managed to split the Shiite vote. And to my understanding, Amal is probably going to retain the finance ministry in Lebanon. That was the expected deal. But it is interesting that the political wedge was created between the dynamic Shiite duo that so far has kept Lebanon in this stagnation.
All right, Ariel, Dan, stay with us. I want to bring into the conversation now Dr. Walid Fares, foreign policy expert and author of Iran Imperialist Republic. Walid, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Lebanon, of course, is a mosaic of religions, and there are built-in rules and structures to try to reflect that. Explain to us a little bit how the power structure is divided and how that was reflected in these elections.
Well, on the one hand, you have the Constitution. You have the Constitution since the Taif Accord 3 decades ago in 1990. And then you have reality. Yes, there are communities, and each community is provided with a position inside the government. The president has to be Maronite. The Speaker of the House, Nabih Berri, is Shia. Sunni should be the head of the government, the executive branch. But reality on the ground is that regional forces have a lot of influence on what happened inside Lebanon. The major regional force was the Islamic regime in Iran. They had Hezbollah, and they had the ally Amal for a long period of time, for decades actually. But on the other hand, what happened in the region between Israel and Hezbollah was the first reason for why this election was possible, because Hezbollah had blocked the elections, had blocked the election of anybody who's not the ally. But then you have to keep an eye on Syria, where the HTS also destroyed the Iranian and Hezbollah influence in Syria by bringing down Assad. But I don't think they have the same design as Lebanon. So yes, it's a very careful situation. It's very good that Joseph Aoun or someone like him were basically elected. But again, the challenges are going to be significant.
Right. You mentioned Hezbollah. Of course, they played an important player in this election as well. They've got their supporters, their allies, also Christian parties supporting them. How did this turn out for them? What does this mean for Hezbollah?
For Hezbollah, it's clear. This election is the result of a new balance of power. That is the result of the Israel-Hezbollah war. There is no doubt about that. Their leadership, Hezbollah's leadership, is not here. Iran's regime, of course, has been weakened. They counted on another faction, Shia faction, which is Nabih Berri, who made a choice on his own. He won the Ministry of Finances. He got it from Joseph Aoun. So now Hezbollah is going to be challenged. Hezbollah remains a large military force inside Lebanon. Let's not dream here. And it will take a challenge to remove it. Now the challenge, instead of being on the shoulders of Israel, America, and France, is going to be on the shoulders of the Lebanese army. That's the important development that occurred today.
The previous 12 attempts to elect a president since October of 2022 failed. And that happened under the looming presence of Hassan Nasrallah, the former chief of Hezbollah. That is the change that brought up upon this breakthrough. That is the only thing that changed from the 12th attempt to the 13th attempt, is that Hezbollah severely weakened. Nasrallah, the de facto head of state in Lebanon, is no longer there. And so this enabled this political shuffle to happen. Also, we're seeing this political shift, potential split between Amal and Hezbollah. So really the changes that happened in the Middle East, in the region, following the death of Nasrallah, the toppling of the Assad regime in Syria, created this new climate in the region, and specifically in Lebanon, that enabled to bring upon this change.
All right, and Dan, we are 17 days away from the end of the current ceasefire. How might this new president affect the outcome of that, or how long it will hold? Let's put it that way.
Well, again, it's a good sign, because he said clearly he is beholden to the ceasefire and to the principles behind the ceasefire, which is that Hezbollah cannot have a military force doing anything of consequence to Lebanon, and certainly not a raid on the border. But there's more than one level here. The ceasefire is what interests Israelis in the short term. But in the longer term, and this should interest Israelis in the West and everyone, Lebanese included as well, is whether he makes good on what he suggested today, that he would actually move to implement UN Security Council resolutions, which are very much in Lebanon's interest, to have there not be armed militias in Lebanon. Now, if he does this, that is the sea change in Lebanon.
He also did say he vows to end Israeli occupation.
Well, now it depends if he is giving lip service to Hezbollah's nonsense about the Sheba farms being occupation, or if he's talking about Israel withdrawing from the south, where it currently still has troops, and that's legitimate enough. But it couldn't be stressed enough. Hezbollah and Nasrallah, basically, was the effective ruler of Lebanon a few months ago. This means Lebanon was under the boot, essentially, of Iran. Right now, there is a chance that Aoun, who is backed by the moderate Arab world and by Europe and by the US and by the international community, will act accordingly, and that is basically a complete pivot. It's a U-turn for Lebanon. And if he makes good on this, or if he even tries to make good on this, probably this will free up hundreds of millions of dollars in aid from the Gulf that have been held up because of fear that it would end up in the hands of Hezbollah and therefore Iran.
As the war in Gaza continues, some IDF soldiers are choosing to speak out against some of the orders they were given while on active duty in the Strip, including setting fire to buildings. It's a small movement, but the soldiers say that this is just the tip of the iceberg, hoping to entice more people to speak up and pressure the government into a ceasefire. Emma Siegel brings us the details.
Israel has been at war with Hamas for over a year now, but some soldiers are refusing to continue fighting inside Gaza. More than 130 soldiers signed a letter saying they don't agree with the way the war is being fought and don't believe it will bring the remaining 100 hostages back home. A conference on Tuesday called The Refusal for War gave these soldiers a chance to speak to a packed audience of supporters.
Dan, I want to ask you, as the war goes on, is this a movement that we can expect to see grow?
I do think it'll grow, because even though Israel is a country that is no stranger to introspection, self-criticism has been suppressed instinctively, even by people who would normally be opponents of the government and very liberal and peaceable, because there is a sense that A, Israel had no choice but to act as it did, B, Israel is unfairly treated by the world community, and C, there's always a circling of the wagons. But right now, there is more than a sense that the war needs to come to an end, and that diminishes the willingness to put up with what people think is excessive. So for both reasons that are moral, like people who believe that Israel's doing the wrong thing, but also political, because they want to force the government to bring an end to the war, I think you'll see more and more of this.
Iran's top general in Syria said last week that the Islamic Republic was, quote, defeated very badly by the fall of Bashar al-Assad. This week, two senior IRGC commanders said that Iran is currently unable to retaliate against Israel's last strikes in October due to financial constraints and the loss of its key Syrian ally.
This, I think, is a key quote. He's saying Russia played a pivotal role in the assassination of senior IRGC commanders in Syria by Israel, especially the killing of General Said Ghazi Mousavi in Damascus in late December 2023. Mousavi was one of the key IRGC officers coordinating Iranian activity in Syria, in Lebanon. And so this gives us a very interesting glimpse into the reality of how Iran perceives this, the fall of the Assad regime.
Certainly very interesting. Dan, betrayal by Russia, fall of Assad, Hezbollah weekend. Iran is still standing. What are the options? Where can it look to right now to keep some sort of relevance and to keep its axis of resistance still alive, still fed?
Well, there's an implied assumption in your question that it has any reason to maintain an axis of resistance in a region which is a chaos project and interfering in other countries. I think their wise option, if they care about the Iranian people, would be to cease and desist from any such activity. We hear the Iranian general talking about how they have financial constraints. They always had financial constraints. It was always stupid for the Iranians to spend billions of dollars trying to influence events in Lebanon and Yemen.
And yet they did.
And yet they did. So perhaps now they are rerouting to a different strategy. That would be great, and it would be even greater if the Islamic Republic allowed free elections in which they would be crushed. Look, the betrayal in Syria is clearly true because Russia has its own imperatives. Russia was coordinating with Israel in Syria. Obviously, Russia was not going to allow Iran to achieve its full ambitions in Syria. And in the end, Russia decided to cut its losses and abandon Assad while welcoming him to Moscow. The loss of partial control over Syria, the loss of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the thrashing of their air defenses in Israel's last attack obviously renders Iran weaker. The incoming Trump administration might well be more aggressive towards Iran as well. So it's conceivable that we'll see an azimuth shift in their global strategy.
The Azerbaijani president Ilham Aliyev is accusing Armenia of posing a, quote, fascist threat that needs to be destroyed. Aliyev threatened further military action if Armenia does not comply with Azerbaijan's territorial demands, more specifically, to open the so-called Zangezur corridor, which would create a land link between Azerbaijan and Turkey through Armenian land. Now, Armenia's leader called the comments a possible attempt to justify a fresh conflict. Dan, we were talking earlier, you've been to Armenia many times, and you mentioned that there's something interesting not just about what was said, but how Aliyev said it.
Yeah, Aliyev has designs on sovereign Armenian territory, which is different from Nagorno-Karabakh, which was a self-governing enclave populated by Armenians, but within the territory, the recognized territory of Azerbaijan. Now, there is a fear in Armenia, and that fear is backed by Western intelligence, that they intend to invade Armenia to seize this corridor, which would create a land bridge to Turkey and basically extend Turkey's influence via a land bridge and a trade route all the way to Central Asia. Aliyev has been talking suddenly about this fiction of Armenian fascism and how it must be destroyed, and if the Armenian leadership doesn't destroy it, then he, Aliyev, would destroy it for them. Now, this mirrors almost one-to-one the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin before he invaded Ukraine. And basically is more than just analogous. It is like a red flag and all alarms blazing from the perspective of Armenia, which puts Israel in a very interesting situation. Israel has a somewhat shameful alliance with Azerbaijan. Shameful because this is one of the world's most despotic regimes, but it is clearly a case of realpolitik in the extreme. Azerbaijan gives Israel a forward base vis-a-vis Iran. It buys Israeli weapons that have been used against the Armenians, and it sells Israel oil. But Israel may not want to aid and abet an invasion of Armenia and a seizure of the corridor, because that would work very much to further embolden Turkey, which Israel has an issue with right now. So, complicated.
Very complicated. Dan Perry, thank you very much for your input, your analysis, for being with us in the show.